So, Zach, this week we saw something that was it was pretty remarkable in a couple of ways. The president got about as emotional as I've ever seen him in addressing really any issue over the course of his now almost 8 years as president. And what we also saw was as limited and as I guess narrow as it has to be when it's only a function of an executive action. We saw some movement, some slight change in orientation of our gun safety regulations in this country. Give me your assessment, your broad assessment first of what the president did this week, and then we'll get into the specifics of what he actually spoke for.
Yeah, happy to talk. I actually had the honor of being in the room, so I was there when he made the announcement, and I couldn't agree more with you. He was as emotional as I've ever seen him. He certainly has a reputation for being a bit academic, and clearly he's extraordinary public speaker, but sometimes seems a bit aloof or disconnected, and this was the opposite of that. His remarks were incredibly personal, and he even began to shed a tear when he started talking about the victims of gun violence, most especially the Sandy Hook children. And I think that goes to having sat in that room, I can say that this is not a political question for him. This is a very human response, and I think anybody that was in that room or people that are working on this issue across the country, they don't see this through a partisan or political lens. They see this as really a public health crisis and something that we need to come together and tackle. And for the most part, so do Americans. I mean, there's just not very much in modern political life where you get 75 or 80% of the people agreeing with things, which I think that's one of the things that's unique about what the president is offering and what most of us who are working on these issues. We're looking for these very broadly popular common sense policies to take effect. And while they're not going to prevent all gun violence or certainly not going to stop some of these horrific mass shootings, they will save lives, and I think that's what's most important.
Let's walk us through some of these things, and then when we want to circle back to what you were saying about those people who are working on this issue and the way they perceive the obstacles to getting any traction on this issue. So give us a sense of what exactly, when the president announced, and there were multiple measures that he announced, and some were sort of proposals, I guess, to Congress in some respect, but some were ones that were not even rose to executive orders as much as it was simply changing some strategies within the executive branch.
Yeah, that's right. In many ways, this was a very I think in some ways these are narrow changes, but they are important changes. And not surprisingly, the executive branch has enforcement powers that up until now it hasn't been fully utilizing. The most important piece of what he did was looking at this unlicensed sale loophole. So right now, there's quite a large number of sellers of guns. So these aren't people that are selling guns occasionally. These are people who are regularly selling guns, but they fit under this interesting loophole where they can sell guns regularly, but not be required to get a license. And so they can go to a gun show, they can sell over the internet through Arms List, which is basically the Craigslist of gun sales, and they can sell a pretty large volume of guns, and they don't fall under the same requirements as like a brick and mortar store that would be selling. And so the president closed that loophole by saying that if he's clarifying in the law that if if you're selling guns, you need to get a license, and then you need to follow the same rules as all the other gun dealers. And what that really means is that then anybody that's buying from them will have to go through a background check. So that lack of clarity before, it just allowed anybody that wanted. It was such a gray area. Anybody that wanted to evade the law, they could just go to these people at a gun show or find them online and buy a gun without any questions asked.
Now, so this, my understanding of it is that it's rather than looking at where you're selling the guns, it is measuring certain sort of things that would determine whether or not it's actually a business for you. If
That's
you
correct.
take credit cards, if you have, maybe employees or a logo or something like that, it makes it really clear this is a business and this is not you selling. You're not a collector and you're selling an old musket to somebody as a one-off or something like that. So
that's right.
Let me,
yep.
and I guess this question applies to all of, or to a lot of these measures, but and so maybe we should get to it in a moment. But so when people talk about the gun show loophole, does that mean that loophole is closed, or does it mean that it's narrower?
I think effectively this will be narrowing, but I think a pretty dramatic narrowing. For the most part, people who are selling guns at gun shows and people that are doing high volume sales, almost all of them are good, respectable, law-abiding citizens. And once this law has been narrowed, I think they'll want to follow the law, and they will. And this will allow then, once those good law-abiding citizens are following the law, then you can zero in on the bad apples, the ones who are they're the ones who are supplying criminals with guns. They're making easy access for abusers to get guns, and we want to make sure that we can zero in on them. So by narrowing the loophole, you can then allow law enforcement to find the real bad actors in the mix. And right now we have such a gaping loophole. It's very difficult for law enforcement to zero in on who really is responsible for putting so many guns in the hands of dangerous people. And so it's not perfect. Clearly, the better thing would be for Congress to act. But as the president said, and what we all know is Republicans have politicized this issue. They've dug in and they refuse to act. I mean, it certainly would be better for them to pass a law that comprehensively closed this loophole and did it in a way that was respectful of Second Amendment rights, but they clearly refused to do that.
All right, let's. We've got just a minute in this segment. Talk to us about the other proposals, or at least tick off one or two more, because I know that there were added enforcement of FBI and ATF agents to fully comprehensively examine background checks. There was talk of up to 250 more special agents, so that this can we can have a more complete accounting of these background checks. Is that accurate? And what else is the government going to do?
There is. That's accurate, which is a very important piece. I mean, ATF has been chronically understaffed and under-resourced, so there'll be more enforcement, which is good because that means they'll be enforcing these laws, and anybody that's following the law will have nothing to worry about, and those who are breaking the law, of course, they'll be easier to find because we'll have more enforcement officers making that happen. The second piece, which was also really important, is the president committed to streamlining and modernizing the background check system to make it even easier and more comprehensive and easier than it is today. The system has been in place for about 16 years now, or 15 years, and it's due for some millennial modernization to make it easier, better, and cleaner. And I think that will be very helpful. And then the president proposed a couple of other things that were not specifically related to background checks. He talked a lot about mental health and the need to be working on mental health issues and mental health interventions, and seemed to have a very clear idea about how we can do that in a way that doesn't stigmatize those with mental illness, but make sure that we're bringing in records into the system to make sure that those who are dangerously mentally ill don't get access to guns, and then also using good intervention mechanisms so that people who are showing real dangerous or violent signs can can be helped. And the other piece,
Zach,
which I think
Zach, we got to take a break. Hold off on that other piece.
Sure
Let's
thing.
talk about it when we come back. And then I want to also ask you, if this was in the power for the president to do, why did he wait this long to do it? We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more on Ring of Fire Radio. So, Zach, when we broke, you had outlined a number of the steps that the president had taken, including, and I guess maybe Congress might have to issue this money for helping with mental health issues, streamlining the background checks, adding agents to man the background checks, closing to a large extent the gun show, the so-called gun show loophole. You were going to tell us about one more measure, and then tell us why, if the president could do this now, why did he wait till now to do it?
That's a great question. Let me get at the final thing that the president talked about, which was talking about gun safety technology. And I think this is really interesting. It's funny. The thing about gun safety technology is that it really hasn't advanced very much in a long time. For a variety of reasons, we've got a lot of advances in safety technology on automobiles, whether it be airbags or seat belts or materials to help in a crunch on a car accident, or then of course we also have a great deal of simple technology about how it's very hard for children. You have a child-proof cap on pills to make sure that they can't easily get access to those things. I mean, there's a lot of examples of consumer technology that is provided for safety that really hasn't been applied to guns. And
a big part of that, it seems to me, is because gun manufacturers are protected from any type of liability. I mean, so
no question.
When we have drug companies who are putting out products, the reason why we have those safety caps is not because they're so kind-hearted, is because they know that if they allow they sell a product where kids would have access to these things, they'd get sued.
Yeah, I think that's right. We basically, in most of these other markets, whether it's an automobile or drugs, pharmaceuticals, you have high standards that are set, and then there's consequences if you don't adhere to those high standards. And for a variety of reasons, the gun industry has been immune from that. Part of it is because they're literally immune. There's immunity built into the law, and I think there's also been there's been a tendency for attorneys and attorney generals to not pursue criminal or civil liability on some of these things. So we definitely need to change the context. We need to hold them to a higher standard, and then there should be consequences if they don't meet that. And part of what that then spurs is exactly the innovations you were just saying, that it wasn't out of the kindness of their heart that, in fact, the automobile industry famously fought
Right.
seatbelts and airbags and all the rest. But now they're indispensable. They're a marketing boon. We have more cars on the road today than we've ever had, and we have less death. I think it's actually an excellent example of how we don't have to get rid of a product. What we need to do is make it safer, and we've done that with automobiles. We managed to face it as both a public health problem and, of course, a consumer product problem.
But because we have these
of
obstacles of regarding liability, we're not getting that with guns. So the president is actually using both a research function and sort of the power of the federal government being a big consumer of guns to push the gun manufacturers in that direction.
That's exactly right, and I think that's the exciting thing about what he's doing. This is something interesting and new and innovative. We'll see how much legs it has, and certainly it'll be interesting to see how it incubates over time. But he'll be putting research and energy into that, and as you just said, the purchasing power of the federal government is very powerful, and it creates a market in and of itself. And I think we're going to see some interesting things done there. So, then you raised this question about why did it take so long? And it's a really good question. I would say
in some ways this is him doing this is almost it almost says that he is accepting a certain measure of defeat, isn't it?
Well, I think what it certainly says is that these things are only possible within when you create a political context for them to happen. And that's true in all change that we've fought for in this country. That we have to create a political context in which then politics and policy making become possible. And even, I think the thing about Sandy Hook, which is so interesting, the president basically never mentioned gun violence in his 2008 election or his 2012 election, and he's not alone. I think this was an issue that was in the wilderness, despite the fact that behind the scenes, in kind of without a lot of media attention, there were mass shootings that were happening nearly at the same level and same degree that we see today, but they weren't talked about. And then, of course, Sandy Hook woke the country up to these dynamics, and he inherited that right after his reelection. But there wasn't a political context for action, and by that I mean both the raw organizing and movement building activities that needed to happen, and also the policy-making imagination to get things done, which is part of the reason that the Manchin-Toomey bill failed in the Senate, and it was part of the reason that his administration didn't take the kind of executive actions that were possible. They didn't have an imagination to get it done, and they didn't have the political power and political will behind them. And I think those two things have changed in the last few years. A lot of organizing has happened in the states. We're starting to see action in the states. There's absolutely a thriving grassroots movement at play. That's a powerful counterweight to the gun lobby. And then it's as that has happened simultaneously, and this is a place where the president does get some credit, he's gone back to his administration and said, what more can we do? And I think those two things, and clearly the part of this is in the context of these horrific shootings that we've seen over the last few years. And anyway, it's led to this moment, and I think he deserves credit, but I will say
I want to give him that credit. I guess maybe I'm just a little cynical insofar as that this is an acknowledgement that nothing's going to happen legislatively, and that his taking executive action, even though it may alienate those potential allies, there's really no bargaining partners on the other side. So why not go and do what can be done?
Yeah, I think it's right. I think like on so many things that have happened during his presidency, I think he had hoped for some sort of reconciliation on things and unified to tackle some of these big problems. And he's dealing with, in this case, a Republican Party. And it's not just Republicans. There's certainly many Democrats who fall in this space, too, who have just locked up with the gun lobby and the NRA and have decided not to take action. I will say, though, the thing for me, I think if you look in the long run on this issue, you're not going to be looking to the president is sort of a lagging indicator. Certainly the U.S. Senate is a lagging indicator. They're going to come along when we build the kind of long-term sustainable movement of people on the ground having conversations with their neighbors, having conversations with their local elected officials, and starting to get action happening in the states. And part of that is we need to get out of the difficult political context of Washington, D.C., which is so divisive and divided, and it turns every issue into a highly charged partisan issue. And on something like this is an issue that Americans can agree on the solutions. We recognize the problem, and so we need to start finding different venues. And once we start showing traction in those venues, I think we'll see the federal government follow, both the president and of course, the Congress.
Zach Silk, thank you so much for your time today. I hope that your vision for where we end up on some type of sensible gun regulations in this country is accurate.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. It's always good to be on.